If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, for a better experience, switch to the video version. The link is in the top right corner of the video and in the episode description. Hello and welcome, I'm Fernando, a GP in the UK. Today we're looking at the NICE guideline on osteoporosis, specifically how we diagnose it and how we assess the risk of fragility fractures, always focusing on what is relevant in primary care only. The links to the NICE guideline is in the episode description. Right, let's jump into it. Let's start by saying that we should consider assessing fracture risk in all women aged 65 and over and all men aged 75 and over. Additionally, we should also consider assessing fracture risk in women under 65 and men under 75 if they have risk factors. Examples of these risk factors include a previous fragility fracture, current or frequent recent use of oral systemic glucocorticoids, a history of falls, a family history of hip fracture, a low BMI below 18.5, smoking, drinking more than 14 units of alcohol per week, and any cause of secondary osteoporosis. Causes of secondary osteoporosis can include endocrine conditions such as hypogonadism in either sex, including untreated premature menopause, and treatment with aromatase inhibitors or androgen deprivation therapy. They also include hyperthyroidism, hyperparathyroidism, hyperprolactinemia, Cushing's disease, and diabetes. Other causes include gastrointestinal conditions such as celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, chronic liver disease, chronic pancreatitis, and other causes of malabsorption. Then we have rheumatological conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory arthropathies, as well as hematological diseases such as multiple myeloma. And finally, we have respiratory conditions like cystic fibrosis and COPD, and other conditions like CKD and immobility due to neurological disease or injury. We should not routinely assess fracture risk in people under the age of 50 unless they have major risk factors, such as current or recent glucocorticoid use, untreated premature menopause, or a previous fragility fracture, because they are unlikely to be at high risk. Now, how should we actually assess the risk of fracture? We can use calculators such as FRAX, which we can use without a bone mineral density value, if a DEXA scan hasn't been done, or Q-fracture to estimate the 10-year absolute risk. FRAX can be used for people aged 40 to 90, with or without a bone mineral density value. Q-fracture can be used for people aged 30 to 84, but the bone mineral density value cannot be added into that tool. If someone is older than the age range covered by these tools, we should assume they are at high risk. Additionally, we should interpret fracture risk estimates with caution in people over 80, because a 10-year prediction may underestimate their short-term risk. We should not routinely measure bone mineral density with a DEXA scan before doing a FRAX or Q-fracture assessment. These tools estimate a 10-year fracture risk using simple clinical information and help us decide whether a scan is actually needed. Skipping this step can lead to a necessary DEXA scan in people who are clearly low risk. It can also lead to missed scans in those whose risk is borderline, and it is therefore an inefficient use of resources. We only need to measure bone density when the FRAX or Q-fracture score is close to the intervention threshold, where a DEXA scan result could change the treatment decision. So the NICE guideline recommends using FRAX or Q-fracture first, and then requesting a DEXA scan only if it is likely to influence management. If we do a DEXA scan, once we have the bone mineral density result, we should recalculate the absolute risk using FRAX with the bone mineral density value included. The intervention threshold is the level of risk at which treatment is recommended. The NICE guideline does not define that threshold. Instead, we as clinicians should follow local protocols or national guidance. I will cover this in a different episode on osteoporosis treatment. We should also consider measuring the bone mineral density before starting treatments that can rapidly reduce bone density. such as sex hormone deprivation therapy for breast or prostate cancer. People under 40 should have their bone mineral density measured to assess fracture risk only if they have a major risk factor, such as multiple fragility fractures, a major osteoporotic fracture, or current or recent use of high-dose oral systemic glucocorticoids, meaning more than 7.5 milligrams of prednisolone or equivalent per day for 3 months or longer. We should consider recalculating fracture risk in the future if the original risk was close to the intervention threshold and only after at least 2 years, or if the person risk factors change. Again, for intervention thresholds, we will need to follow local protocols or national guidelines. We should also remember that risk assessment tools can underestimate fracture risk in certain situations. This includes people with multiple fractures, previous vertebral fractures, high alcohol intake, high-dose glucocorticoid use, or other causes of secondary osteoporosis. As mentioned earlier, causes of secondary osteoporosis include endocrine, gastrointestinal, rheumatological, hematological, respiratory, metabolic, renal, and neurological conditions, as well as prolonged immobility. Finally, we should keep in mind that fracture risk can also be affected by factors not included in the risk tools. For example, living in a care home or taking drugs that impair bone metabolism, such as antiepileptics, SSRIs, pioglitazone, proton pump inhibitors, and antiretroviral medications. So that is it, a review of the NICE guideline on osteoporosis. We have come to the end of this episode. Remember that this is not medical advice, but only my summary and my interpretation of the guidelines. You must always use your clinical judgment. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.